I was 24 years old when my partner, Ed Bailey, and I flew from Bettles, Alaska to Killick Lake in the Central Brooks Range in August 1975. Arrogance means fingers of the hand extended in Inupiat. We bushwhacked up the north side of Arrogance Creek into the palm of those fingers, camping below sharply rising granite slabs and spires. For 2.5 days we explored the valleys, cirques, and ridges of this stunningly beautiful area. Precipitous granite walls rose straight up from small cirque lakes. Traversing huge boulder piles to gain the ridge to the next valley, we saw huge black massifs looming above fluffy cotton grass, dotting the lush green below. The Arrogance peaks were stark, magnificent, and overwhelmingly awesome. In 1930, Brooks Range explorer Bob Marshall wrote, "Adventure, whether physical or mental, implies breaking into unpenetrated ground, venturing beyond the boundary of normal aptitude, extending oneself to the limit of capacity, courageously facing peril. Life without the chance for such exertions would be, for many persons, a dreary game, scarcely bearable in its horrible banality." The Alatna is a Class 1 wild and scenic river, partly in the gates of the Arctic National Park. Many people used this area even in 1975 when we were there. It is still a popular climbing and backpacking destination. We leisurely canoed the Alatna for 5 days, stopping to fish for pike and grayling and watch bears and other wildlife. Our takeout was Help Me Jack Lake. The Continental Divide, the headwaters of the Alatna River, flowing south, are visible. With headwaters in the Endicott Mountains of the Central Brooks Range, the Killick River flows north 135 miles through incredibly remote wilderness, in part in the gates of the Arctic National Park. We flew into a small lake at the confluence of the Killick River and April Creek, and spent several days exploring the upper reaches of the river. A classic glacial valley, the river's treeless terrain, and the open ridges are excellent hiking. After several days of exploration, we floated through the mountains, into the foothills, and finally down to the Colville River. Class 2 to 3 rapids at Sunday Rapids were the highlight of the trip, which was mainly an easy float. Moose, caribou, Dall sheep, grizzlies, and fox were commonly seen. The Colville River is Class 1, but it is deceptively swift. We made quick time, even in a raft. At Umiat, industrial oil and gas development intrude into the wilderness. Here, we decided to pull out and fly back to Anchorage. Flying from Fairbanks to the upper reaches of the Wind River took us over the Yukon River, the village of Venati, where we finished the trip, and over the East Fork of the Chandalar River. The two remote, wild, rugged river valleys at the headwaters of the Wind River in the Philip Smith Mountains are within the boundaries of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Our starting point was a small lake at the 2,700-foot level where the two valleys converged. A brown bear foraged a hillside across the valley for ripe blueberries. The upper valleys are open with some brush, mainly willow and tundra. Even in August, portions of the upper reaches of these streams still have sheets of Auf ice that form from layers of frozen groundwater in winter. Great hiking up the ridge country is like entering a mountain desert. Vegetation is scarce on these rocky slopes, and sheep are sometimes visible. Downstream, Center Mountain is the main geological feature on the upper Wind. A short portage and some dragging in the braided shallow upper Wind River finally brought us to the confluence of the other branch and enough water to finally begin the real float. We encountered torturous insects, white socks, no-see-ums, and mosquitoes so intense they tested our endurance. Floating provided a daily escape. It took us roughly 4.5 days to reach the confluence with the East Fork of the Chandalar River. A few challenging rapids through rock gardens provided some technically interesting floating. We also had to deal with afternoon thunder and lightning storms, one of which chased us out of the river until it passed. The Chandalar is an easy Class 1 to 2 float to Venati. Along the way, we stopped to watch 2 wolves trade off carrying a 30-pound salmon from a gravel bar. Unfortunately, the summer of 1990 was a year of huge forest fires. The final 3 days of floating were marred by heavy smoke. Ridges often were not visible, and smoke was so thick our eyes burned. We were very glad to make it back to Venati and fly back to Fairbanks. The 135-mile-long John River is a wild and scenic river and is at least half in the gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. Although most people start this float at the Hunt Fork, our trip started at Anaktuvik Pass, a small native community at 2,200 feet. The setting is spectacular, with craggy mountains rising over 5,000 feet on both sides of the valley. The river put in was just outside of town, and with plenty of water from recent rains, we set off. Rafting was slow until we reached the canyon, and then it was fast, solid, boulder-strewn Class 3 water. We finished the second half of the fast water the next day to Hunt Fork, where the river volume picks up and the current slows. Just above Hunt Fork, the forests begin. The remaining 100 miles of river was Class 1. The weather turned stormy. We endured several days of heavy rain and wind. The John rose more than 2 feet. Creeks flowing off the mountains turned into chocolate-covered roaring torrents. Trees floated by in the river. Some days we had to paddle hard to make progress against the wind. We did get some good weather between storms and hiked up the high ridges where we could see evidence below of the old Hickled Highway in the tundra and wetlands. The road was finally built where the Dalton Highway is today. We decided to use the John River pickup, a CB radio housed in a waterproof box powered by a solar-charged battery along the river just before the confluence with the Killick River. Alan James brought his riverboat down from Bettles, about 5 miles up the Killick River, to pick us up. This was a good choice because the airfield at Alaska, 60 miles down the Killick, was flooded.